Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling something that impacts every single one of us, whether we realize it or not.
Uh-oh. Sounds serious.
It is, but I promise it's not as dry as it sounds. We're going to be talking about the global financial system.
Okay.
But hold on, before you hit that skip button thinking this is all about boring numbers and spreadsheets.
Right.
This deep dive has a twist. We're going behind the scenes to uncover the power dynamics.
Ooh. Interesting.
Between currencies.
I like it.
Yeah, you often hear about the global economy,
Mm-hmm.
but what does that actually mean?
Right.
Well, today we're going to break it down
Love it.
using Dmitrii Gorbatenko's insightful logbook entry as our guide.
I think this is going to be a really fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
His piece really gets to the heart of the matter.
It really does. Gorbatenko's piece really got me thinking, you know? He argues that while the system seems super complex,
Yeah.
it really boils down to a few key currencies calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the US dollar,
Of course.
the euro,
Yep.
the British pound,
Mm-hmm.
and the Japanese yen.
Right. It's like this exclusive club.
Yeah.
And everyone else is kind of like on the outside looking in.
Exactly. And being outside that club
Yeah.
can have some pretty serious consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
As Gorbatenko points out, he uses the example of how someone's purchasing power can just plummet,
Yeah.
even if their income stays the same.
It's wild.
It is. It's like, imagine working just as hard,
Mm-hmm.
but suddenly
Yeah.
you can only afford half as much as before.
That's a scary thought. And sadly, it's the reality for a lot of people around the world.
It is. And that's what I found so fascinating about Gorbatenko's analysis.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't just talk about like abstract economic theory.
Yeah.
He connects it to the lives of everyday people.
Exactly. He makes it real.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think one of his central arguments is that this dominance of a few currencies,
Right.
it's not just a coincidence. It stems from historical factors,
Oh, of course. Like what?
like the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, which really gave the U.S. dollar a significant advantage early on.
Okay, so history plays a role. But what about today? How does this currency power dynamic play out in the 21st century?
It's all about network effects. Think of it like social media.
Okay.
The more people use a platform, the more valuable it becomes, right? The same with currencies. The more they're used in global trade and investment. And as reserves, the stronger they get. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. It's really, really tough to break.
Gorbatenko uses the Russian ruble and the Argentine peso as examples of what happens when countries are so heavily dependent
Right.
on these major currencies. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Imagine trying to play a game
Okay.
where the rules constantly change in favor of just one player.
Oh.
That's what it can be like for countries outside that elite currency club. Take Argentina, for instance. They've experienced significant economic instability, partly due to, the fluctuations of the Argentine peso against the U.S. dollar.
So their economy is basically at the mercy of these global currency shifts, which can make it incredibly difficult to grow
Yeah,
or even protect their citizens financially.
precisely. And, Gorbatenko doesn't mince words when he's describing the consequences.
Yeah.
He even compares this system to the Middle Ages.
Wow. That's a pretty striking comparison. He actually calls it fertile ground for fraud and exploitation,
Yeah, strong words.
implying that those in countries with dominant currencies have a certain level of security and opportunity
Yeah.
that others simply don't. But wouldn't some argue that despite its flaws, the current system has facilitated globalization and lifted millions out of poverty? How does Gorbatenko address that?
That's a great point. It's a nuanced issue.
Yeah.
Gorbatenko acknowledges those complexities. He's not saying globalization is inherently bad,
Right.
but rather that the current financial system underlying it
Yeah.
is fundamentally flawed.
Okay.
He argues that while some have benefited greatly, others have been left behind, and the gap between the haves and have-nots is widening.
So it's not just about the existence of a global system, but about how it's structured
Yeah.
and who it ultimately benefits.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of Gorbatenko's, I think, most thought-provoking statements.
Oh.
He basically says, forget about space travel. Let's focus on a fairer world system.
Wow. It's a bold statement, but it does get you thinking, right?
It really does.
Like he's basically saying we're focusing on all the wrong things. Instead of reaching for the stars, we should be fixing the very foundation
Yeah.
of our global society. But what would a fairer world system actually look like?
That's where things get really interesting. Gorbatenko argues that real change won't come from technological advancements or flashy projects. It requires reforming the financial system itself.
Now, reforming a system as complex and as entrenched as global finance,
Right.
that's no easy feat. What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
A complete overhaul.
It's not necessarily about tearing everything down and starting from scratch. Gorbatenko suggests a range of potential solutions.
Okay.
Some more radical than others.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, one that he emphasizes is the development of alternative reserve currencies.
Okay, pause right there. For those of us who aren't financial experts,
Sure.
can you explain what a reserve currency is
Of course.
and why it even matters?
Think of it like this. Just as individuals might hold gold as a safe and stable asset,
Okay.
central banks around the world hold certain currencies as reserves. And right now, the U.S. dollar reigns supreme as the dominant reserve currency.
Right.
And this gives the U.S. a lot of leverage in international finance.
I'm starting to see how this all ties into Gorbatenko's point about power imbalances. If one currency holds so much sway, it can create vulnerabilities for other countries.
Exactly. So one proposed solution is to create alternative reserve currencies to reduce that dependence on the dollar and diversify risk.
So instead of putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak,
That's the idea.
we spread them out a bit.
That's okay.
And there are different ways to approach this. Some propose using a basket of currencies, like the IMF's special drawing rights,
Okay.
which includes the dollar, the euro, the yuan, the yen, and the pound sterling.
Wow.
Others suggest pegging currencies to commodities like gold or oil.
So it's not just about finding a new single currency to replace the dollar, but potentially creating entirely new systems.
Precisely. The goal is to foster greater financial stability and give developing countries more of a voice in the global economy.
And I know we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
But before we dive deeper into these solutions, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
The impact of all of this on everyday people.
Gorbatenko uses some pretty stark language,
He does.
saying that millions of people's lives could worsen
Yeah.
if the current system isn't addressed.
It's not hyperbole. He's not exaggerating.
Yeah.
While we often talk about economics in abstract terms,
Yeah.
it's crucial to remember that these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
They represent real people's lives, their livelihoods, their hopes, and their dreams.
So this isn't just some academic debate.
Not at all.
This is about whether people can afford basic necessities, whether they can send their kids to school,
Yeah.
whether they can have a secure future.
You got it. And Gorbatenko's argument is that the current system, with its inherent inequality
Right.
and vulnerabilities, is making it increasingly difficult for many people around the world to achieve those basic aspirations.
It's almost like there's a disconnect between what we often hear about,
Yeah.
like global economic growth, technological progress, and the lived reality of millions who are struggling just to get by.
That disconnect is precisely what Gorbatenko is trying to highlight.
Yeah.
And he's urging us to shift our focus from short-term gains to long-term sustainability and fairness.
Okay, so we've established that the current system has some serious flaws. And we've gotten a glimpse of some potential solutions, but where do we go from here?
Right.
How do we move from awareness to action?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks, because we're about to get practical.
Welcome back, everybody. We ended the last part talking about how Gorbatenko suggests developing alternative reserve currencies.
Right, to address those power imbalances
Yeah.
in the global financial system. And we got a quick overview of what reserve currencies are and how they work. But I'm still kind of wrapping my head around this concept of alternative. It sounds like a massive undertaking, you know? Are there any real-world examples of this actually happening?
It's definitely complex.
Yeah.
But there are a few interesting developments worth noting. For instance, the IMF's special drawing rights, or SDRs,
Right.
which I mentioned earlier.
You did.
It's a kind of international reserve asset that's already being used.
Oh, okay.
And it's based on a basket of currencies, including the US dollar, euro, the Chinese yuan, Japanese yen, and British pound.
So it's like a more diversified reserve currency that's not tied to any single country's economy.
Exactly. And while the SDR isn't meant to replace the dollar entirely,
Right.
It does offer an alternative and potentially more stable option, especially for countries looking to reduce their reliance on the U.S. dollar.
That makes sense. But are countries actually embracing SDRs?
We are seeing some movement in that direction. Some countries are starting to hold more SDRs in their reserves.
Okay.
And there has been discussion about expanding their role in international transactions. It's a gradual process, but it is a sign that the global financial system is not static. It can evolve.
I remember Gorbatenko also talked about the idea of pegging currencies to commodities like gold or oil. Is that a realistic alternative?
That's a more controversial proposal.
Okay.
Some argue that pegging to a commodity like gold could provide more stability and protection against inflation. However, others point out that it could also create new risks and limit a country's ability to, manage its own monetary policy.
So there are trade-offs to consider
Yeah.
with each potential solution.
Absolutely. There's no silver bullet.
Right.
When it comes to reforming the global financial system, it's about weighing the potential benefits and drawbacks of each approach and finding what works best in different contexts.
Gorbatenko also stresses the importance of fairer trade practices.
Yes, absolutely.
He argues that often trade agreements are structured in a way that benefits wealthier nations at the expense of developing ones.
Yeah.
Creating these barriers to entry for businesses in those countries.
That's another crucial piece of the puzzle. Trade can be a powerful engine for economic growth,
Right.
but only if it's genuinely mutually beneficial. Often, trade agreements include provisions that give corporations in developed countries an unfair advantage, making it difficult for businesses in developing countries to compete on a level playing field.
So it's not just about the currencies themselves, but also about, the rules of the game, so to speak.
Exactly. And Gorbatenko advocates for a more equitable approach to trade, one that prioritizes fairness, transparency, and sustainable development. This could involve revisiting existing trade agreements,
Okay.
ensuring that they promote fair labor practices and environmental protections, and providing developing countries with the support they need to build strong and resilient economies.
All of this sounds great in theory, but let's be realistic. These are some pretty radical changes.
Yeah.
How likely are we to actually see this kind of systemic reform?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's certainly not going to be easy. It'll require political will, global cooperation, and a willingness to challenge long-held assumptions about how the global financial system should work. But it's not impossible. We've seen major shifts in the global financial system before, like the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, which established the post-war economic order.
Right.
That took vision,
Yeah.
collaboration, and a commitment to creating a more stable and prosperous world.
So you're saying there's hope.
I believe there is. If we can recognize the shortcomings of the current system and come together to envision a more equitable alternative, I think we have a chance to create a world where financial stability and opportunity are more evenly distributed.
Okay, so let's say for a moment that Gorbatenko's vision of a fairer world system actually starts to take shape. What would that look like on the ground for everyday people? What would change in their lives?
Well, for one thing, it would mean greater economic stability for people in countries with currently volatile currencies. They wouldn't have to worry about their savings being wiped out overnight because of fluctuations in exchange rates.
So less financial anxiety, more peace of mind.
Exactly. It would also mean greater access to opportunities, as businesses in developing countries would have a fairer shot at competing in the global marketplace. This could lead to job creation, economic growth, and ultimately a better standard of living. Imagine a world where more people have the chance to build a brighter future for themselves and their families, regardless of where they happen to be born.
It sounds like a virtuous cycle, but Gorbatenko goes even further, right? He talks about rethinking how we measure economic progress altogether. What's wrong with the current metrics?
He's challenging the traditional focus on GDP as the primary indicator of economic success.
Okay.
GDP, or gross domestic product, measures the total value of goods and services produced in a country, but it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't account for things like income inequality,
Right.
environmental sustainability, or the overall well-being of a population.
So it's kind of like judging a book by its cover. You might miss the real substance.
Exactly.
A country could have a high GDP, but still have widespread poverty and environmental degradation.
Precisely. Gorbatenko argues that we need to develop more holistic measures that capture the true cost and benefits of economic activity. Metrics that take into account factors like social justice, environmental impact, and human happiness.
That would be a pretty major shift in perspective. Instead of just focusing on how much money is being generated, we'd be looking at the quality of life for all.
It's a more nuanced and, I would argue, more accurate way of assessing true progress.
This all sounds incredibly complex, and I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but what can I, as an individual, do to help push this vision of a fairer financial world forward?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in more detail in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks, because we're about to get practical. Okay, Deep Divers, we're back and ready to tackle the big question. We've unpacked the power dynamics of the global financial system, explored some potential solutions, but now let's get down to brass tacks. What can we, as individuals, actually do to help create a more equitable financial world?
Right. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by, the sheer scale of these global challenges.
Absolutely.
But remember, every journey starts with a single step.
So where do we even begin? It's tempting to think, well, what can I really do to shift a system this big?
That's where Gorbatenko's insights become so crucial.
Okay.
He reminds us that change starts with awareness.
Okay.
So, step one, educate yourself.
Okay.
We've touched on some complex concepts today. Reserve currency, trade agreements, alternative economic indicators. Don't let those terms intimidate you. There are tons of resources out there. Books, articles, documentaries, podcasts even.
Podcasts, there you go.
All at your fingertips.
There's that deep dive spirit. But I've got to push back a bit here.
Okay.
Knowledge is great, but it doesn't magically transform the world on its own.
You're absolutely right. Information is the foundation.
Yeah.
But action is what builds the house.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay. So once you're feeling more informed, look for ways to support organizations actively working towards a fairer financial system. This could be groups advocating for responsible lending practices, debt relief for developing nations, or those promoting financial literacy in underserved communities.
So donating our time, our money, our skills. Got it. But are there everyday choices that we can make that actually have an impact? I mean, it's so easy to feel like a drop in the ocean.
Don't underestimate the power of those drops.
Okay.
Becoming a conscious consumer is a huge step.
All right.
Support businesses committed to ethical sourcing.
Okay.
Fair labor practices. Research where your bank invests its money. Does it align with your values? Even something as simple as choosing fair trade coffee or chocolate can send a message.
It's those small choices that add up, right? Creating that demand for more ethical products and practices.
Yep.
What about engaging with our elected officials? Does that actually make a difference?
Never underestimate the power of your voice.
Never.
Contact your representatives. Express your concerns about these global financial issues. Advocate for policies that promote economic justice. And hold corporations accountable for their actions. Remember, politicians respond to the needs and desires of their constituents.
Okay, so we've got education, supporting organizations, being mindful consumers, speaking up to those in power. Anything else we can do on a more personal level?
This may sound simple, but talk about it.
Okay.
Discuss these issues with your family, your friends. Raising awareness is key to building a movement for change. The more people understand the challenges and potential solutions, the more likely we are to see real progress.
Gorbatenko's piece is a perfect conversation starter, wouldn't you say?
It's a great jumping off point for sure. This deep dive has been about giving you the tools to understand and engage with these really critical issues. Remember, change starts with awareness.
Right.
And then action.
So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
let's go back to that provocative question Gorbatenko leaves us with. If this system is unsustainable, what does that mean for our future? What are you thinking about after this deep dive?
Well, it makes me consider the potential consequences of inaction. If we continue down this path of, ever-increasing financial inequality, the social and economic fabric of our world could be severely strained. We could see more instability, conflict, suffering.
It's a sobering thought, but Gorbatenko doesn't just leave us with a warning, right?
Right. It also makes me think about the incredible opportunity we have to create a different future. One where finance serves humanity, not the other way around. A future where prosperity is shared, sustainability is prioritized, and every individual has the chance to thrive.
That's a powerful thought to leave our listeners with. It's not about despair. It's about recognizing the urgency and acting on it. This isn't just about economics. It's about the kind of world we want to live in and the legacy we leave for future generations.
So I encourage you to ask yourself, what role do you want to play in shaping that future? What steps, big or small, can you take today to contribute to a more just and equitable financial world?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey.
It has.
But hopefully you've come away with a deeper understanding of these complex issues, and most importantly, a sense of empowerment, that you can be a part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep learning.
And keep asking those tough questions.